should mention it now.
Okay.
All right, so we're on video. Well, Darrell, you're right in that regard about that the teacher will say things that seem strange or weird to the student or out of bounds or just kind of interesting. And then later the students will begin to reflect and stumble on to the idea that maybe that was right. Let me try it out and like that. Basically, really what's going on is that the Dhamma is counterintuitive because our intuition is instinctual. And it's our instincts that in modern society, even in the time of the Buddha, you could say that that was modern society compared to where our instincts actually were developed. Back in the old hunter-gatherer days, perhaps even during the time when there was a lot of ice, the Ice Age, etc., like that, that this is the human. And so by the time of the Buddha, the society had gotten to the point that it was relatively safe. Wasn't completely safe. They still had...
Uh-oh. Hang on. What on earth did I do?
You lost your video.
Crying out loud.
Is your camera light on? I've got a light on this camera.
Yeah, my camera light's on. I think that USB port is kind of dodgy. Let me just double check. Weird. Okay. Huh. Great.
Well, never mind. Can you play with your video and I'll continue on?
Okay, I'm listening.
All right. It's counterintuitive. The Dhamma is counterintuitive because it's wisdom-based. Intuition is feeling-based. And that there is a huge disconnect in our society that in the West is talked about in the distinction between the heart and the mind. But there is no heart in that regard, that the reason that people feel heart in the middle of the chest, which is associated with the pumping mechanism of the heart, is because the feelings that are associated with the chemicals in the blood can be felt in the heart, but that those feelings come from chemicals that are being released, or let us say, ordered to be released by the adrenaline gland from the glands that are associated with the reptilian brain.
Okay.
All right? So, when we operate instinctually, we're operating out of self-preservation instinct, we're operating out of nesting instinct, we're operating out of power or procreation instinct, and we're operating out of the instinct of territory. And you can see that when people are afraid, then these instincts become very strong. For instance, in the U.S. politics right now, you have a lot of tribalism. You have a lot of us versus them, and all of that is instinctual nature. To where, in fact, if people, like an example would be any two senators that consider each other from across the aisle, if they will sit down and become friends and understand things, they can find cooperation. In other words, they're doing an investigation, they're working with metta, they're doing Dhamma. But right now, the instinct is, oh no, those are people on the other side of the aisle. If I meet with him privately, I'm taking a knife. No, I'm taking a gun. because of all of the fear. And so the Democrats hate the Republicans, the Christians hate the Muslims hate the Christians, and everybody hates the Jews. Sorry, that's a line out of a song. All right, so why is that? The answer is that because the human brain was developed in a time when others actually were dangerous.
Okay.
Especially other predators, other animals.
Right.
Okay, and so in primitive times, any rustle of noise, if two primitives with their spears are walking down a path in the jungle and they hear a rustle, and one of them hears that rustle, becomes immediately afraid and runs away, and the other guy turns around to see what it was, he's the one that gets eaten. Okay? Nowadays, it's quite appropriate to turn around to see what it was and to not run. And yet here we have all of these people running from things that they do not know because they're not well inspected. So our instincts, our intuition was developed in prehistory. Most of those instincts, most of that tuition still operates at that level and operates inappropriately in modern society.
Okay.
All right, so the Dhamma in general is counterintuitive because our intuition takes us into our instincts, which means we operate with an old pattern and an old system that may not be appropriate today, and that's why it's called suffering or dukkha. The cause of dukkha is because our feelings are inappropriate for the situation.
Okay.
So,
how does that tie into the so frequently, in fact, almost, I can't think of an exception to it anywhere in any of the Buddhist literature or talks that I've read or listened to, that dukkha is the result of ignorance leading to craving, leading to clinging. How does that tie into it?
well, what is craving?
A desire to possess something?
Well, if you remember back in what I was teaching you long ago, ignorant feelings. When feelings are ignorant, like for instance you like something and that liking is ignorant, then your liking goes to wanting. Wanting goes to clinging.
Mm-hmm.
So you're a little bit ahead of your game, you're ahead of your skis they're talking about now when you go directly to clinging. We need to back up to this issue of feelings because the feelings are what causes the wanting or the desire. And that feeling is a feeling of liking. I like it.
Right.
All right, there's three kinds of ignorant feelings. The ignorant feeling of liking, which ignorantly goes to I like it, means ignorantly I want it, and even more ignorantly it must be good. If I don't like it, ignorantly that means I'm going to try to take power over it, try to get rid of it, try to push it away. And if it is really ignorant, then we call it bad or evil. And if it's really, really ignorant, then that bad or evil becomes magically evil. Okay? So the layer of ignorance will take us deeper and deeper into suffering because a magical ignorance means someone is possessed. And now you got to call an exorcist. And here you go with a horror movie. So that's how ignorant people can get. Mostly, though, people only go to, I like it, therefore it must be good, or I don't like it, therefore it must be bad. Now, this actually is the story of Adam and Eve.
Right.
Of eating of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So what that meant is that they took on the knowledge of good and evil. Now, the knowledge of good and evil is a form of ignorance. It's not real knowledge. It's a judgment call.
Right.
The real wisdom is that things are not evil or good. That a much better criteria to use is, are things wholesome or unwholesome, kusala or akusala, and an even deeper way of looking at it, the way the Buddha looks at it, is suffering and no suffering, dukkha nirodha. But ignorant people judge it from the position of good and bad. Now, if we bring it back from good and bad back to the feeling, we wind up with three ignorant feelings. The feeling of I like it gives rise to I want it, gives rise to I own it, or I want to own it. And that's where the I comes from. If the feeling of not liking or displeasure comes, then the displeasure goes to the point of trying to remove it, get rid of it, take power over it. And so that's also a form of clinging. In other words, you're clinging to it in order to drag it off. That also creates the self. The grasping and clinging creates the self. If there's no grasping and no clinging, then there's no grasper or clinger. The grasping requires a clinger, at least intellectually so, or at least mentally so.
Okay.
All right. And if you think of it from physics and energy perspective, and let's talk about it at Newtonian physics, that an object can either be pushed or pulled. If there is a force that's pushing it, normally that force is associated with a physical object. It's got a self in many people's idea. Like I get behind my car and I push it forward because it's not able to have the motor to do it.
Right.
All right, so this is why the self is also created in the idea of not liking, because we have to get rid of something, and so it's me that has to get rid of it. There's where the me comes from. The third kind of feeling is the feeling of confusion about whether I like it or not like it. Not sure.
Right.
You can see that by in the situation of someone who's coming to you from a great distance, and you see them coming, and you're not sure whether it's male or female. You want to know whether this person is going to be a good harbinger or a bad harbinger. Okay, so just the person himself, we're wanting to know whether we like this guy's coming or not like this guy's coming. Because in the beginning, when we just see he's coming, we're confused. We don't know. We become curious.
Yeah, and that seems to be the case with anything where you have new information, new sensory information, because I know I encounter that uncertain feeling when it comes to something I'm hearing and I don't recognize it while the brain's trying to process it. What am I hearing? Mm-hmm. Or when encountering something like, say, for instance, a food that I haven't tasted before, and there's that first couple of seconds, and there's that feeling of uncertainty about it.
Right. I don't know whether I like this stuff or not. I know exactly.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. That's exactly the feeling that we're talking about, and that ignorant feeling gives rise to doubt, fear, trepidation, insecurity, and you can see why that would also be considered a hindrance. Because when people start to meditate, they're doubtful about it. They're curious, but they're uncertain. Now, one of the things that fits in with that is the student will think, well, here I am, I'm going to start meditating. I'm sure going to get some good out of it, but I'm sure that I can meditate. Everybody does. And then they sit down, and within a very short period of time, the mind has wandered away from the breath. And they don't like that. because their idea is that they can. In fact, that first guy that I was telling you about, the 23-year-old, he did not like that his mind wandered away. Therefore, he was more secure with just letting it wander away, rather than take responsibility for the fact that it wandered away and he didn't want it to wander away.
Right.
This is actually the situation that everyone is in. No one likes the fact that their mind is out of control. That we are actually mentally out of control. Why? Because we've never bothered to be in control. We never had the tools to do it. We didn't have the skills, we didn't have the process, we didn't have the procedures. Now that we have the Buddha Sasana, we have the Dhamma, we actually have the theoretical underpinnings and the practice and the process by which we can, in fact, come out of our instinctual nature that makes so many mistakes in our lives, start to watch that these instincts bring up feelings, and that then we ignorantly operate on these feelings rather than doing it with full-on awareness. An example of that would be if you like something, and you like it wisely, not ignorantly. So at the point of contact, when you see something and it impacts you, whether it be an article in the grocery store or a pretty girl behind the counter at 7-Eleven or whatever it is, if you say, I like it, then the next thing is that I want it. But if we do that wisely, we can leave it at just like it. I like it. And that's it. We do not have to want it. We could just say, I like it.
It reminds me of a story that someone else told about Ajahn Sumedho. And when he was very first student of Ajahn Chah, the lay people had come to visit. And there was a very attractive woman there. And somehow this came up, and Ajahn Chah asked Sumedho what he thought of it. And he said, like, but do not want.
Who said that?
Sumedho. That was his response. Like, but do not want.
Mm-hmm. So he had heard this before.
Or saw it in his own experience.
No, that's actually very Buddhist. That's the whole point of that teaching about Paticca Samupada, that point about feeling. So he was actually answering a PhD thesis exam question. And he answered it absolutely correctly, spot on. That's exactly the right answer to that question in the Dhamma.
Okay.
I like it, but I don't want it.
Right.
All right. In fact, there is a Pali term for that. The Pali term is atam maya ta. Now, the ta is actually just an ending, or like isness, ness, or ton, like so. A means not. Tam means work or do or employment. In fact, the Thai language has that same word as the Pali language of tam. So when in Thailand somebody has a job that makes money, that's tam nan, because they're making money. Mm-hmm. Okay? So in English we say, do you have a job? In Thailand, tam nan alai. What's your work? Okay, so that tam is a very important word here. Atam means not working, not doing, not messing with, not playing with, not doing anything with Mara. Okay, now Mara or Maya, depending upon whether it's Sanskrit or Pali, is normally is considered a magical word when it's used as devil.
Right.
It can also be considered worldly.
Okay.
All right. But Maya also is known to be that which pestered the Buddha when he was sitting for 6 weeks, and Mara's 3 daughters. Do you know what the Mara's 3 daughters are?
No, I've never caught that detail.
Moha, Lobha, Dosa. The 3 daughters of the Buddha are the cause of suffering. Not the 3 daughters of Buddha. The 3 daughters of Mara are the causes of suffering.
Right, the greed, aversion, and delusion.
Greed, ill will, and delusion. Those are the 3 aspects of Mara's daughters. So when we say Atamayata, that also means I'm not going to mess with Mara or his daughters. In that regard, these daughters especially, and by inference Mara too, is not the world, and it's not the devil. It's my own damn fault, if we go to the Margaritaville song. These are internal mechanisms within one's own mind.
Right, I see.
Okay, so that second noble truth, or Mara, is in fact not worth messing with. And how we know that is at that point of contact, to not mess with these feelings. If we operate with them ignorantly, then we will be dancing with Mara. So staying out of it. Atamayata means I do not mess with it. Now, how that word is used in Thai culture, it's used in Thai culture, even if the Thai people don't know about it. It's used in Thai culture in the sense of, in the West and in India and in the time of the Buddha, the culture had the idea of conflict resolution. If there is a conflict, the wisdom dictates to resolve that conflict, as opposed to just keep the conflict going. Right now in American politics, it's just conflict, 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 no conflict resolution at all.
Right.
All right. The Thai way, though, is not conflict resolution, it's conflict avoidance. And so in the Thai politics, what you'll have is everybody's agreeing with everybody else and nothing gets done. There is another way of looking at it in that sense of Atamayata, and that is there is no conflict. Even if the other person thinks there's a conflict with me, I don't have any conflict with them. Because thinking about having a conflict, that's a form of suffering. Whether you're avoiding the conflict or you're trying to resolve the conflict, both of those are suffering. Not having any conflict at all, that's Atamayata. But the way that the Thai culture operates with Atamayata is with conflict avoidance.
So conflict avoidance as opposed to not having any conflict at all. So how do we make sure that we're practicing not having any conflict as opposed to avoiding it?
Well, if you find that you're avoiding a topic or avoiding a person, not wanting to get into it.
So how do we transition from that into not having any conflict at all? What has to happen internally in order to get there?
Be a dog.
Be a dog?
Yeah. How does if you mistreat your dog or spank your dog or punish your dog or do anything with that forms a conflict with the dog, 5 minutes later, what happens to the dog?
The dog's forgotten it.
That's it.
So it's a matter of relinquishment, setting aside.
That's actually the definition of the word Atamayata that Bhikkhu Bodhi uses. He uses the word relinquishment.
Ah, okay.
To give it up, to let it go. And not only that, but if you'll realize in that regard, all conflict is in the past.
That's true. Wow.
that in the present moment there is no conflict.
Yeah, I mean, because even if two people are face to face and they're upset, the thing they're upset about is already moments ago.
Exactly.
Wow, boy, when you put it in that light, that's really cool to think about it in those terms.
Exactly. Which means that if we stay out of the past, we stay out of conflict. If we stop thinking about the past, we stop creating most of our suffering. Most of our suffering is by thinking about the past, bringing up old conflicts, or actually bringing up old events and then turning them into new conflicts.
Yeah.
How that's done is you can imagine that people some business has a business meeting. A group of people are in the business conference. They have their business meeting. Everybody has their say. Everybody's in agreement. They come to a vote and they leave the meeting. And on the way out the door, people are still talking about the meeting because they didn't either voice their conflicts or worse still, they're creating new ones. I should have thought about this. I should have said that. That didn't go the way that I wanted to, but they didn't think about it at that time. It's only when they're reflecting upon the past that they start creating conflicts that in that present moment of the meeting didn't exist. And so at the end of the meeting, you have, say, 10 people that are in agreement, and then 5 minutes after the meeting is over, you have 10 people in conflict. Because they won't let it go. They won't relinquish that meeting. They hang on to it. They create their own suffering by doing that. And they do it ignorantly because they're not watching their feelings.
Right. Huh.
And all of this, going back to the beginning of what we were talking about, is extremely counterintuitive to the mindset that thinks about conflict in the sense of either conflict avoidance or conflict resolution. Now, in conflict avoidance, where that stuff came from was Confucianism.
Really?
That the Thai society is not a Buddhist society, it's a Confucian society. And I've got a lot of evidence to back that up, and I present the first point of evidence is Confucius' own writings.
Really?
We also look at the history of things, and we begin to understand that there is a group of people in China, in Yuan prefecture or province, and in that group, they call themselves Dai. And that the people of Burma, who is on this border with Yuan, there are people in Burma who also speak Thai language, and it's very similar. It's the same language. That we know that the Thai language came from China. It came from this group of people. It came, and if you look at also the map, you'll see that the Vietnamese language is a Proto-Chinese language. You'll look at Lao, it's Proto-Chinese. You look at Cambodian, in it is a Khmer language, is an Indo-European language. I know, I've been to Khmer as a monk, looking with monks, watching the students learn Pali, and being jealous because the Khmer language is so close to Pali as a native language. Then you go to Thailand, and Thailand is a Proto-Chinese language. You go to Burma, and now you're going back into a language that is Indo-European. So how, with these two places, did Thailand and Laos come to be Proto-Chinese language? And not only Proto-Chinese, but it came cultural. Well, it had to do with migration. We don't know when it was, but it was probably around 2,000 years ago. But we've had many, many different migrations from China into Thailand. The biggest and the worst one was in 1840s and 1850s during the Opium Wars. where there was a huge influx of Chinese. So it's happened over and over and over again. But meanwhile, the Thai language is a curious mixture of Chinese and Pali.
Huh. Interesting.
And what makes it really, really Proto-Chinese is because of the tones, the tonal language. Not only that, but here's something really amazing that I've recently found is the Dai language. Because the people in Yuan province, they have to speak Mandarin because that's the language of that part of China. And yet the numbers and many of the words of Mandarin are the same language as the Dai language that is in Yuan province. So all of this stuff is interconnected, these old languages. Now, the reason that I want to mention this is because it's not just the language, but it's the culture that came out of China, out of Confucianism into Thailand, probably about, let us say, someplace between the time of the Buddha and Confucian, because you know that Confucius and Buddha were contemporaries.
I didn't realize they were contemporary. I knew they were close. I didn't realize they were
Very, very close. That time. And so from the time of Confucian and the establishment of Confucian society and then the migration of that Confucian society to Thailand and then the introduction of Buddhism. And all of that happened the first 1,500 years of the time of the Buddha. So that by the time of, let us say, 700 AD, we know that that Mahayana Buddhism was already deeply entrenched in South Thailand. We've got stupas, we've got artifacts, we've got museums, we've got all kinds of stuff. And not only that, but the remnants of Mahayana are all over the place. Modern statuary is not all Theravada Buddhism. There's still a lot of Mahayana statuary around. Not just at Wat Suan Mok, but all over South Thailand. So we know that it was Mahayana before it became Theravada, and we've got that time period starting about 700 AD is where that stuff came from. So we have a culture that is Confucian in Thailand that is built on conflict avoidance. So when they see someone, they'll remember that person as an old enemy that 15 years ago they had a problem with, and they never resolved it because both people would avoid each other. Now, that doesn't necessarily have to happen if they're in the same family, because one of the family members will act as a go-between and patch things up. But without a go-between, without an agent, cultures that practice conflict avoidance generally appear backwards to those societies that practice conflict resolution.
Yeah.
Okay. In fact, you could go so far as to bring in Larry the Cable Guy. He's American, so what does he say? He says, "Get her done."
Oh, yeah. Yeah, okay.
All right? In Thailand, the idea is never mind. Never mind, I've been right. I'm out of here. So you have a get her done society versus a Mai Pen Rai society, which means never mind, or Mai Pen Rai is that conflict avoidance that is a lie that says everything is already okay. There's not a problem. Mai means no. Pen is the verb to be, and Rai or awry is very similar to the same word in English, that things go awry. So we say nothing's awry, no problem, which means nothing is going to get done. And so, and both of them are based on the past. Both of them are based upon remembering and harboring ill will and not doing anything about it. So two boys in the Thai school, when they don't like each other, they run away from each other. In America, those same two boys would have a fight together.
Right. Or at least be sworn enemies.
Yeah, or sworn enemies, and they'll find ways to fight, to
That's
subterfuge, to undermine, etc., like that.
right.
All right. So this is now getting back to the idea then that this all stuff is really, really for Westerners, really counterintuitive to go for this atamayata, to where the Thai people are fairly close to it, because conflict avoidance is similar to no conflict at all. Conflict resolution means I've got to go do something.
Right.
I've got to think about it. I've got to plan it out. I've got to figure out what was wrong and go fix it.
Right.
That's all past and future. No happiness there. And so that's the Western mind, and so it's very counterintuitive to recognize there's no conflict, there's nothing to be done. Be here now. Enjoy the moment. Don't try to fix problems that aren't broken.
Yeah, but there's only seems like there's one thing lacking in that, or one thing missing is that if you've done something to cause harm to someone else, even if you've dropped or set aside the event yourself, you still have the other party, and it seems like there's some value or use in going back to them and saying, you know what, I was wrong, and I apologize.
Yes.
To make amends.
Here's something interesting about that. You brought up an interesting point. I think it has a lot to do culturally over time that Jesus was able on the cross to forgive. And that's brought into the Christian mentality that we should forgive our enemies. In other words, we should come from the conflict resolution mentality into giving up, or just avoid, or better still, to just forget it. And people will say, oh, I'll forgive you, but I won't forget.
Right.
That's the same thing as I didn't forgive you. No,
exactly.
The way to say it is forget about it. Even if that sounds like the mob, still, that's the best way to go, is just to forget about it. To drop it. Not important. It's in the past. Leave it alone.
Right.
Okay. So, by being counterintuitive, when people are confronted with the Dhamma, many things start to happen because they're different in the Dhamma than they are in the world. Part of the reason for that is that the society is built up with the intention of getting stuff done, making progress, social climbing, getting a raise, stepping on other people to take advantage, etc., like that. That's all part of our society. And so changing that mentality requires that we have to look through the problems of our own society to recognize that, hey, the reason that so many people in our society are so unhappy is because of the culture. The culture itself is broken. They even say in Washington that the system is broken. It's the system that's broken. And the manifestation of that broken system is people adhering to that system.
It's broken. Hang on. Yeah, that works.
All right. And the Buddha has a word for this. It's called Sila Bhatta Paramasa. You know the word Sila?
Yeah.
All right. So Sila Bhatta Paramasa means attachment to Sila, attachment to virtue. Clinging to rites, rules, rituals. Just like that first student that I was telling you about that I dismissed was saying, now is the time for you to do as you see fit. That had to do with the fact that when he would sit in meditation, he did not like that his mind was out of control. And for him, the solution to deal with the not liking that his mind was out of control was not to bring his mind into control, but to let the mind just wander, thinking that he was going to get some value or advantage by claiming that he was meditating for an hour when in fact he was sitting just, as you might say, goofing off.
Right.
All right, so what he was actually avoiding was the conflict of recognizing that his mind was out of control, that he could not clean his mind out. Now, everybody is in that position in general. In fact, the Buddha talks about the very first noble step. The first step of the path of nobility is when the person recognizes that I can clean out my mind, no matter how obstructed the mind is, I can clean it out. In other words, no matter how much I'm stuck in the past or stuck in the future or wanting things or thinking about things that I don't have or reflecting upon the enemies I'm going to beat up and defeat, etc., like that, or all the confusion, by throwing all of that stuff out, we can be here now. That's the first step. And some students are not capable of making that step when they first try the practice. They don't like it because they recognize that the mind has wandered away. And in fact, I would say that that happens basically to everybody unless they're warned correctly. That's why we say when the mind wanders away, never mind, start again. And we do that with a great big grin. Aha, I caught you. I caught you wandering away. Because the normal intuitive way is, I caught you running away. You should not have wandered away from the breath. Bad mind, bad me. Oh, bleh, I don't like any of this. And that's what happens with people. Over and over again, the mind wanders away. They don't like it. But when they recognize, oh, well, everybody's like that. That's the condition of the human mind. Everybody does this. And those who are successful at meditation are the ones who say, even though I don't like the fact that my mind is out of control and wandered away, never mind, I'm going to come back. I'm going to actually develop the skill so that whenever I think about it, whenever sati comes up, I can clean the mind out and come to the here now. Get out of the past, get out of my conflicts, get out of conflict resolution, and be here now. This is the main teaching of the Buddha, the tathata. The Buddha even called himself tathata, which is the word, he called himself tathagata. Tathagata is, got the word tathata in it, and tathata means thusness, thisness, here-ness, nowness, this present moment. And that's what he called himself. So that's how important be here now really was to the Buddha, that was his own name for himself. And so that's the practice. Whenever we can remember to clean the mind out, then we can. We can clean the mind out. Even if we have, let us say, a favorite song or just a song that's stuck in the mind, we can still clean that song out of the mind. How do we do that? By putting another song in the mind, temporary, until we get that new song stuck just a little bit, and then we can get rid of it. And that first song was then replaced by a second song, and then the second song is replaced by nothing at all. Or let us say by joy. So if you've got a song and you want to shove it out with a new song, make sure it's a really happy song. Like the James Brown meditation we talked about.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, I feel good. That's the way to look at the world, is that whenever the mind is wandering away, we bring it back happily, joyfully. We start, in fact, developing the powers. The word power is in Pali, it's the word iti, or idia, or idiopada. In fact, the word pada is the same word as patana, which means footing. It's the same word that's in Greek that we use for the word pedal or pedestal. Okay? When they build a building, we have to have a foundation.
Right.
That foundation is also called footing. That's why patana is called the foundations of mindfulness. It's the footings. It's the base. It's our feet. That's where the word comes from. So idiyapada means the foundation or the basis of power. Now, in Sanskrit and in Hinduism, the word iti or idiya is said as siddhi. And it always, when you're talking about the cities, it means magical powers.
Right.
Magical powers. The magical power of being able to dive into the dirt and swim in dirt or swim on the earth as if it were water. To be able to walk on water. To be able to walk through walls or mountains. To be able to see things at great distance. Clairaudience, clairvoyance, seeing the future, seeing the past, all the kinds of stuff that magical thinking people want to have. All right? But that word, idiya, does not have to mean that kind of power. That's just what happens with religions, is they magicalize everything. The original usage of the word in the time of the Buddha meant the power of success. In other words, you can see that if you're powerful, you're successful, prosperous, wealthy, secure. These are the powers. And so we should start manifesting those powers immediately at that point in time when we recognize that the mind has wandered again. Aha, I caught you. I'm bringing in my power. I'm successful. When I'm thinking about the past, I'm thinking about a dangerous past or even a more dangerous future. But right here now, I'm safe. I'm secure.
Right.
Right. That's the way that we look at these powers. Now, the four bases of power are what we've already talked about many times, and that is inspection, investigation. To be able to stay focused on something. The word concentration is used, but it's basically the ability to clean out the mind and keep the mind cleaned out and keep the mind fit for work. An example of that is reading a book or reading an article. Sometimes you can read a book and sometimes you can't. Why is that? When I can't read a book, that means my eyes are going along with the words, but the mind is thinking about something else, perhaps kicked off by a thought of what was in the book. But now the eyes are paying eye service, but there is no reading being done because the perception is doing something else and not paying attention to the eye door.
Right.
Right. So, if I can read, that means that my perception is concentrated, it's fixed, it's staying on the eye door, so that as I'm reading, I'm comprehending what I'm reading.
Okay.
All right. So, that's the kind of concentration we're talking about.
Okay. I understand.
Not talking about tang.
That's not what I thought you were going to say, but okay.
We're not talking about concentrate in the sense of orange juice concentrate. We're talking about the ability to stay over a period of time on a particular topic.
But we're also not talking about the hyper concentrated state that people seem to be so obsessed with, where what they call it access concentration.
Actually, the word access concentration is extremely problematic.
Okay, that doesn't surprise me.
Here's the reason for that is actually the word concentration, that's a Pali word, does not appear in that sequence until the second jhana. In that regard, what it means is to be able to keep the mind quiet and not thinking. As opposed to the first jhana means that the thinking is there, but it's applied and directed and sustained. That's the concentration, just like reading a book. Here's a better example. Mario Andretti. Have you ever heard of that name?
Yeah, it's been a long time, but I remember the name.
All right, he's able to concentrate all the way around a track, over and over and over again. Why? If he starts thinking about Aunt Susie or his income taxes, he's dead in 5 seconds.
Right. Well, the reason I mentioned that was because I could be wrong where I read it, but I think it was in Mindfulness with Breathing where Buddhadasa mentions that these practices for, and I'm not going to say he used this word, but this was the gist of it, of excessive concentration or hyper-concentrated are actually detrimental.
Exactly. Exactly so. You read that in a work that is called Vipassana by the Organized Method, and he has a similar book called Vipassana by the Natural Method.
Yeah.
So Bhikkhu Buddhadasa, through my training, took me out of Organized Method into the Natural Method, and so that's the way that I teach, is I teach the Natural Method. There is an advantage to having deeper concentrations if you're talking about the jhanas in the sense of that first jhana is a certain kind of concentration, second jhana is a deeper concentration, third jhana is an even deeper concentration, and fourth jhana is an even deeper concentration. Basically what that means, these concentrated is that in the beginning, we're all over the place.
Right.
In the first jhana, we can go down a list like this. The second jhana is going to be in the sense of being able to keep it at one point, or one focused. Once we have that, then the third jhana brings our feelings to one point, or one focus. So we first get rid of the hindrances. Being free from the hindrances of the clouds of the mind, that's we know the 4 foundations of mindfulness. So the first foundation of mindfulness to go in the correct way is the mental objects. So we clean those out. The second jhana then is associated with the mind, where we bring the mind to a state of quietude, leaving us now the development of the third jhana. And in the third jhana is when we actually start playing with the feelings directly. To make them big, to make them little, to make them this, to make them that, to be completely overwhelmed with feelings, and yet completely in control of the feelings at the same time. Because we can actually manage them. And so if people are practicing third jhana correctly, they get enormous insight into actually how their feeling system works. But many people can do third jhana and not get any insight out of it at all because they don't know what they're doing. They're just they're heading, in fact, to the fourth jhana, which is actually then the body. This is one way of talking about fourth jhana is like out of the body experience. Now, most people who have out of the body experiences either do it because they're very sick or because of drugs. But it is known worldwide that you can control this. You can bring the mind down to the same kind of state that's so close to death because you keep shutting things down. The first thing you shut down is the ability to think. The second thing you shut down is the ability to feel. The third thing that you shut down is the ability to experience the body. All right? These things, these high jhanas, don't actually serve a real purpose. But that's what the Buddha did when he was when he went searching, when he left his family. He went to all the teachers, the best teachers, and learned every skill that those teachers had. And he wound up understanding none of this is working. Let me figure out what's really going on. That's when he began to understand that it's the first jhana that's the secret.
Right.
The ability to apply the mind and keep it focused as you're going down and inspecting things. That we don't need these higher concentrations. So, now let's get back to the issue of access concentration. If real concentration doesn't happen until the second jhana, that merely the first jhana is merely focus, then where does access concentration fit in? Because access concentration is pre-jhana. Maybe the best thing to do is to take the word concentration off of it and just use access.
Okay.
Because what we mean by access is that it's readily available. So what access, or what is called access concentration, means that we're so close to, in other words, we're watching, we're available. We're at least 90% here now. So that when something comes up, we can see it. We're ready for it. We're on guard. We can manage our feelings. So we can actually move from access concentration into first jhana very easily. Merely by focusing on the breath, taking that first deep breath, and you're, with skill, are in the first jhana right then. So access concentration means the ability to go into first jhana, which means the ability, because of the skill, to easily clean out what's in the mind, to throw it out, and to put something better in the mind instead. What are we going to bring in that's better than whatever it was that we were thinking? The powers, success, satisfaction. Oh, this is such a good breath. Oh, I like it so much. Start to enjoy the breathing. Success, safety, security. If we're taking a deep breath, then that means that the air is safe to breathe. If the mind is wandering away, we're normally not breathing very well, that there's kind of a leakage of adrenaline because there's doubts in the mind, insecurities. When we're thinking about the past and the future, we're actually problem solving. Problem solving requires adrenaline.
Interesting point. Okay.
So when we stop problem solving because we're in the here now, there's no problems in the here now.
Yeah, although I would think for most of us, even once we've brought ourselves back to here now, that adrenaline is still, it's going to take a while for it to shut down.
Yes. How do we get it to shut down? By taking a deep breath, feeling secure. By feeling secure, we're actually closing the valve. By taking a deep breath, we can throw the stuff out.
I see. Okay.
Okay, now let's look at the idea of how the self is involved with this. Normally the self is involved in the sense that we think that we need to protect the self. This is one of the main reasons why people adhere to rules. It's because it's instinctual. If I follow the rules, I'll survive. If I break the rules, I'll die.
Okay.
All right? What they don't recognize is that these rules are irrelevant. You may die anyway, whether you're keeping them or not.
Right.
That keeping the rules or not keeping the rules, there's no guarantees.
Right. It's the illusion of safety.
Right. It's the delusion of safety by following the rules, except that delusion is very thin. It's a very thin delusion. We still feel insecure.
Yeah, I see your point.
Because we're not following the right rule. The right rule is suffering and no suffering, rather than the rule that somebody gave you.
Right.
All right. Now, we also know that almost all the rules of society were intended to preserve and protect wealth, or to accumulate wealth. That the original police were designed to keep the white people safe from the black people.
Okay.
At least that was how it was where I grew up.
Yeah. I imagine it goes back further than that.
Yeah, it goes back. Well, police don't go back so far. But
But
always, even the original Bobbies, or even in New York, the police were designed to take care of the wealthy, to prevent the poor from robbing the wealthy.
well, I was thinking more of those people whose job was to protect the king.
Ta-da! That's exactly
Yeah.
it. Right.
Yeah. So it goes back for quite some ways.
Yes, it does. Okay, so that brings up the whole issue of the golden rule.
The one about the one who has the gold rules.
Yeah, well, not only does he who have the gold rules, but he who makes the rules gets the gold.
Ah, okay.
All right. Okay, so Daddy, who just look at a house where Daddy makes the rules. He runs the place. All right, or look at a village, the head man of the village. He makes the rules in order for his own self-protection.
Right.
All right, so that's where the rules come from. And then all of society eventually becomes enamored with these rules, thinking that the rules have value, where in fact rules almost always assume something in the past. They're past and future oriented. They're never oriented towards the right now. The criminals are the ones who are looking for the loopholes. Why? Because but if you look at it from Dhamma, suffering and no suffering covers every loophole. But the SEC, with all of the rules they have on Wall Street, the guys in Wall Street can find ways around those rules, and so they have to write new rules to stop them from doing that. And meanwhile, the guys who've got the money, they go to politicians and say, "Oh, well, let's change that rule so I can make more money."
Right.
Yeah. So that's what rule systems are. That's Sila Bhatta Paramasa. It's designed to exploit. And since I do not have any students that are out there rule making, all I have is ones who have to be shown that they do not have to follow the rules because they're rules.
Right.
All right? That it has more to do with wisdom. So let's take this down to the bottom of the self, down to the bottom where there is a soul. Not just a self, but a soul. The kind of soul that after you die, God gets to use as a football.
Okay.
And he's going to kick you around.
You sure we're not talking about the Peanuts?
Pardon?
You sure we're not talking about the Peanuts? It sounds like Lucy and Charlie Brown, if you ask me.
Well, as long as Charlie Brown believes Lucy
Right.
is God.
Yeah. Well,
It's when he starts to think for himself that he can be free.
then he can quit kicking the damn ball.
Right. Okay. So, getting back to God is a football player, and I'm his football.
Right.
When you recognize, but there is no self. In other words, the atheists and the Christians for many, many years, I think it was because of Richard Dawkins' book on God, and then there's God is Not Great by Christopher Hitchens, and other books like that. For about 10 years, there was big, big discussions at big universities and even in big churches. They would invite an atheist, and the Christians would chew that atheist apart. And there's always the question, does God exist? Not one time did anybody who had any wisdom go into those conversations and say, I don't care whether God exists or not. God is in fact irrelevant. Why is that? Oh, that's going to really upset them to say, well, you can have a God if you want to, but he's actually irrelevant. Look at the way you live your life, and you realize that you live your life as if God is already irrelevant. All right, God is irrelevant, especially irrelevant if I have no soul. If there is no soul, then God cannot use me as a football after I'm dead. But let's look at that just a little bit deeper. If there is no soul that God can kick around, then that means that I am not subject to any of God's rules.
Right.
But if there is no soul, no self at all, in fact, the atheists and the Christians are very close together. Why? Because the atheists think that they do have a self, they do have a soul. It just dies when the body dies. But the Buddha was very clear that he does not teach that, even though that's what he's accused of teaching. It's said like this, that at the breakup of the body, there is the dissolution of the being. Mm-hmm. Highfalutin translators talk like that, you know. So the dissolution of the being, if there's no being to dissolute, then when the body breaks up, it's merely the body breaking up. There was no self there except the delusion that there was a self that was dying.
Okay.
And that delusion is temporary, it's momentary.
Right.
And that some people die full of revenge. They die with the thought, I'll see you in hell. Some people die with the thought of, oh, I'll miss everything. Very few people die with the idea, wow, finally it's over. Wow, thank you very much. I'm out of here.
Right.
Okay, so if there is no self, then like there's no soul, you're not subject to God and His whims and His rules. Then if there is no self, then you are also not subject to the laws, rituals, rules, and ceremonies of men. You're free to make up your own set of rules. Good luck with that. I've got a hint.
It doesn't seem like it should be that hard.
Right, it's not. So that means that we stop paying attention to society. But that's counterintuitive for a little child raised in society who has to deal with all kinds of society. So when they run across a teaching like the Buddha that is saying that society is of no consequence, that all of your suffering comes from inside your mind. Okay, so let's realize though that our society and the way that we exist, that it's actually quite possible for people to be put under stress. In fact, it's easy to do that.
Yeah.
For most people. If you are mindful and alert and aware, then people cannot put you under pressure. One of the, I think, in fact, I sent you an email that got you to call me back, was emails that had Alan Watkin. There was 2 Alan Watkin films that were sent, or videos that are actually one performance with him. If not, I'll send them to you. And in that, in the first part of it, he invited a person out of the audience. This, by the way, was a TED Talk.
Okay.
And he invited the guy out of the audience after he introduced himself and what he was doing, and he immediately started pulling really sneaky NLP stuff on this guy to put him in a state of stress. He put him, for one thing, is he hooked him up to electroencephalograph. He could have done that and not caused the guy stress. But he was joking, intentionally putting the guy under stress. Being in front of a large audience is one thing, but when the guy who's running the show makes sure that you know that there's a big audience watching you, is a further way of putting you under stress. And so he was intentionally, one after another, putting this guy into stress, and then after he got him into stress, you could see the electroencephalograph chart on the computer graphics that were shown on the screen behind him. And then he started having him do various exercises. One of the exercises was to start at 300 and then subtract 3. And how far can you go? So you have 300, 297, 294, 291, etc. like that, down to 270, and then you start to cycle over again. Most people under stress can't do it. They get confused. So did Neil. And then the guy told him about others. In fact, Dr. Watkins normally works with CEOs, very powerful people, people who are smart. But when you put them under stress, they can't do a simple thing like subtract 3 from 300. They become confused. Everybody's like that. When we are under stress, we go into a freeze kind of situation where we can't think. The mind will just, it's almost like having an automobile with a gearbox out of gear racing the engine.
Yeah. Huh.
Okay? But we can't get anywhere. Now that freeze state is a precursor to fight or flight. Fight is the predator. It's also, flight is the victim. But the freeze state is the state of fear. We get into a state of fear, we don't know what's going on, we get confused, and now we're under stress and we can't think straight because we're getting ready to fight or flight, which are very bodily kinds of things. In other words, we need wisdom at that point of stress, and we don't have it. So the next thing, later in the thing, Dr. Watkins actually started to teach Neil how to breathe slowly, rhythmically. He's teaching him anapanasati, and it was quite remarkable to start watching that electroencephalograph begin to change. For one thing, his blood pressure went down. It stabilized. His heart rate stabilized, and all of this happened within about 5 to 10 seconds, 20 seconds of breathing. Settles the mind down. It settles down that fast. Quite amazing to see that. That if we just watch the breath, the mind will settle down. And when the mind wanders away, never mind, come back, start again, and settle it back down. Because when the mind wanders away, it normally will find some small stress, and then it will multiply that, and we'll get back into our normal state of existence, which is basically living in the past and the future, trying to figure out problems and then solving them, and staying upset and in stress moment by moment, because we're not in the here now. But by being able to take a deep breath over and over again, getting long, slow, deep, rhythmic breathing, paying attention to the body, and being here now. And this guy's a neuroscience. He did not use one word, not one Buddhist word. He doesn't probably even know that what he's come across scientifically was figured out 2,500 years ago, but didn't get patented. And I'm really happy that neuroscience is beginning to catch up with the Buddha, because that's the path. I used to think that psychology was the path, but it's not. Certainly Buddhism as a religion will never get to the West. It's got two major enemies, Islam and Christianity, and they'll kill each other trying to kill Buddhism.
I don't know. It seems to have caught on in a fairly big way here in the last 10 years or so.
That's only because Islam hasn't figured it out over here yet. But you wouldn't understand how much Islam hated Buddhism long ago. It is said that the Muslims killed somewhere between 80 and 100 million Buddhists.
Wow.
Over a course of 50 to 100 years, something like that. And they did it in league with the Brahmins. That the Brahmins basically played the game of let's pull a fast one on joy, with Buddhists being joy.
Right.
Or let's you and him fight. That's the other game that Byrne has. So the Brahmins went to the Muslim and said, "Why don't you just beat up on the on the Buddhist over there?" Why? Because they're actually the ones. I mean, Hinduism or Brahmanism is very, very close to Islam. With jinns and heavens and hells and Allahs and all kinds of stuff. And Buddhism said put all of that stuff aside. And in that way, you can also see that atheists and Christians are very, very similar. They're very close together because they still have the idea that there's a self. But that leaves the atheist also under the thumb of society.
Huh, interesting.
But they make the best. In fact, Christians wind up being not nearly as moral as the atheists. Atheists are far more moral in the United States than Christians are because Christians can get forgiveness. They get a, what do they call, a mulligan, a do-over.
Right.
And that's what they're all calling about for Kavanaugh right now.
Mm-hmm.
So, if we see then that if there is no self, that's the soul that the God can kick around, then the self also does not exist. Society cannot also kick you around. So let's paint a scene where that might be useful. Let us imagine that somehow or another we wind up in the police station in the interrogation room. And here we are sitting for a period of time because that silence in that isolation room waiting, you know, and it's got the glass mirror or the glass one-way mirror. And if you look closely, in fact, the right thing to do if you can stand up and walk around in that room is to go peer in to see if you can see what's in there. And if you're not, then study it very carefully and you'll begin to see what's behind that mirror anyway. But most people are too terrified to have their mind in gear. They're not watching what's going on. They're not paying attention to the fact that the police intentionally are putting them under stress just by isolating them.
Right.
Waiting what's going to happen. Okay, and now the police come in with a good cop, bad cop. And their intention is to put you under stress. Perhaps with handcuffs, perhaps with all kinds of things. But if you know the game, you don't have to be under stress. You can make recommendations. You say, hey, you guys, why don't you swap roles? I mean, I like it that you're a good cop, but I think you'd make a really excellent bad cop because you're such an asshole deep inside. And you're a really nice guy. Why are you playing this bad cop role? Why don't you swap and let me see how that works? That would really confuse them because they recognize they're not getting through to you. They're not able to put you under stress.
Right.
Okay, so now let's go to another level of it, back, in fact, to the God part. And that is, I think I've even mentioned to you this. There are cartoons called The Far Side.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, The Far Side. I've seen it on the internet. There are actually dozens of examples of this as line drawings. But the original one that I remember from years ago, I can't find it on the internet now. But basically what it is it is a hallway that is actually a cave. And that this guy is walking down the cave pushing a wheelbarrow. And on the side of the cave are skeletons or half-eaten humans that are in great misery or suffering. And the wheelbarrow he's carrying is of body parts. And standing behind him are two guys in red suits with pitchforks. And this guy, as he's wheeling the wheelbarrow down, he's whistling and he's saying, how you doing, etc. like that. And the caption is, the devils are talking and they say, we're not getting through to this guy, are we? Okay? That's exactly the same scene as being in the police station with the good cop and the bad cop. Right. We go under stress because people are ignorantly not watching how they feel. And so they go under stress. And we put each other under stress. We know all of the cues. And people who study NLP can get really excellent, knowing really how to put people under stress very, very quickly. Which means that if the guy he's trying to put under stress knows these techniques and knows that they're being used upon him, they don't work. Wisdom wins out over ignorance every time. You do not have to be under stress, even if they put you in isolation. You know, in fact, the worst punishment they say that you can give another human being is by putting him in solitary confinement. Why is that? Because that's stressful for people who have no control over their minds. You put a Buddha in isolation like that, and it's just another cave for him to sit in. He doesn't even have to go to Bendabad. They serve him food. So if you've got your mind straightened out, if you really know how to manage your own feelings, then you can have a real joyful experience in solitary confinement. Not a punishment. They cannot punish you. Only you can punish you. And now let's go to the last one on this list, and that is Saint, what was her name? Mary, Queen of Scots.
Okay.
Do you know what happened to her?
I don't remember.
Basically what happened to her is they chopped her head off. I forgot who it was that did that. But she was really regal about it. She dressed up in her finest best. I mean, she was a real queen when she walked in there. And she did it with her head in the air. And she put her head down and she threw her hair like that and said, "Do it!"
Huh.
In other words, even in execution, they could not make her suffer.
Okay.
No one can make you suffer. God can't make you suffer. Society can't make you suffer. You are completely free from all forms of suffering except for Maya. Making your own suffering. And when you don't mess with Maya, when you do not deal with ill will, greed, ignorance, or let us say greed and ill will on an ignorant level, if you deal with your greed and ill will directly, they will turn back to just feelings of, I like it, but I don't want it. Or I don't like it. I don't like that you're sawing my leg off.
Sort of an extreme example, but okay.
Well, I've actually had it. You want to see the scar? I've got a 15-inch piece of steel in the leg, and I woke up during the second surgery on that.
Ah.
But instead of waking up disoriented, I was watching what they were doing. What woke me up was the drill, when they were drilling the screws into the bone. And that woke me up, and I was watching what they were doing. And then they finally looked up to see that my head was not laid out. I was not out. I was watching. And so they increased the dosage to make sure that I would back out. So that's what I mean, is that we are completely able to control our feelings. That body sensation is body sensation. It can be called pain when we don't like it. Or it can be called, what would we call it? An interesting experience if we're capable of controlling our feelings. In the sense of, yes, there is strong bodily sensation, but I'm strong enough to handle it. I'm a tough dude. I'm successful. I'm secure. Saw away on my leg.
Well, is it control of feelings? It sounds like it might be more along the lines of a disentanglement or disengagement from feeling.
Okay? But in order to disengage from the bodily feelings, you have to know and to be able to manage the engaging feelings, which are the mental feelings of, I don't like it. I really don't like it.
That's what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about the bodily feeling. I'm talking about this stuff. It seems like it's more about getting out of the involvement with the mental activity.
Exactly.
Okay.
And when people get injured, and I know because I've been into pretty heavy injuries, liking all of those fast motorbikes, I've got quite an interesting collection of scars ranging from 4 inches up to about 15.
Wow.
And the thing of it is that when the injury happens or shortly after that, much of the suffering has to do with the future over, oh, poor me, I won't be able to walk. Or what's to become of me if I've lost a leg?
Right.
Okay, and so we see various body parts that are all temporary. Every one of them is subject to getting crushed, mangled, banged up, burned, etc., like that. But we get attached to them. And so instead of just dealing directly with the injury and the feeling of the injury, we also deal with the fear and the terror and perhaps the loss of a limb or other things like that. That in fact one of the biggest issues about post-traumatic stress disorder is when your friend standing or sitting beside you, you're both, got your guns out and you're blazing away and you're looking, you're seeing, you bang, and your friend just had his whole head blown off. And you recognize not only, hey, I should keep my head down, but that kind of experience bothers people basically for the rest of their life. They'll have that image come up, and it terrifies them every time. And the people who come back from war, they come back from war, and instead of being able to be wise enough to recognize I'm home now, I'm safe now, no one is sneaking up on me while I'm sleeping, etc., like that. But many of these guys that have, examples would be that the kid goes in to wake up daddy in the morning, and the daddy grabs the kid and throws him across the room. Because he doesn't recognize it is actually his own son that he's in his bed. No, he thinks he's still in Vietnam or Afghanistan or somewhere like that. Okay? Living in the past that deeply. This is post-traumatic stress. Well, guess what? If that's true in a severe case that we're talking about, then isn't that exactly what's wrong with every one of us? The entire human race is suffering under a mild form of post-traumatic stress disorder. Look at the way that the words post means later, dealing with the past, post-trauma. What happened, we consider trauma. We didn't like it. So now we've got stress. And when we do that enough, it's called a disorder. So we all have PTSD because we're always dealing with the stresses of the past, trying to get rid of them, throwing them out of the mind. Well, the right way to throw them out of the mind, don't think about them. So whenever thoughts of the past come, recognize that those are thoughts of the past and throw those out. Stay in the present. If we, in fact, deal with the past, almost always the past will link to the future. An example of that is thinking about my leg getting all blown off like that. Now my thought is, well, maybe I should go to a doctor and have a better job done. Maybe I should have that plate of steel taken out and have a sleeve put in instead.
Okay.
All right? So we deal with it like that in the future. The past, future. Past, future. Suffering in the past now becomes post-stress. And so we continue to do that. We can't keep our minds in the present moment. And so we deal with stress over and over and over again instead of dealing with the present moment. So the right way to practice is whenever we find ourselves with the mind wandering away from the breath, it's almost always going to be back into the past. In fact, if you think about just another place, other than the room that you're in, the only way that you can think about a place is because you were there in the past and you remember it.
Yeah.
So actually you're dealing with so anytime that you're not here, you're not now.
Right.
So that's why we call it the here now, is because if we think about the department store or Aunt Susie's house or whatever like that, then we're dealing in the past. So whenever the mind wanders away from the breath, we gently bring it back, happily, joyfully, building our power. We're building skills now. The skill that we develop is the skill of sati, to remember. We're developing the skills of investigation, to watch, to look, to notice. And we're beginning to develop it as the skill of a habit. This is something that we can build up on. That the more remembering of the breath that we do, then the easier it is to remember it next time.
Right.
By having this as a kind of a fallback, that never mind, whatever happens to me, no matter how mad I'm suffering, I have a fallback. I can just come and breathe and recognize my breath and be happy right now. So I have a solution to all of life's doubts in my own mind, and that gives me great joy. The joy of knowing that I can come back to the breath and investigate and see what's going on and build my powers. Now, I have just given you in order the four of the 7 factors of enlightenment.
Okay.
What's called Sambojana. We practice anapanasati for the fulfillment of the 4 foundations of mindful: body, feelings, mind objects. But we practice the satipatthana for the fulfillment of the 7 factors of enlightenment.
Really?
Yes, and this is out of the Anapanasati Sutta. Everything that I've been talking about today is coming out of the Anapanasati Sutta, number 118, Majjhima Nikaya. So we practice the 4 foundations of mindfulness for the fulfillment of the 7 factors of enlightenment. Now, what makes sati a factor of enlightenment is that it's unremitting. When to remember to watch the breath becomes unremitting, that you keep coming back and coming back and coming back, unremitting, that's when it becomes an enlightenment factor. When we're able to investigate by the memory, by sati, to keep coming back, we also come back and we investigate, we look, we watch, we note, we see what's going on. Over and over and over again, it becomes unremitting. That becomes an enlightenment factor.
Okay.
Because it's unremitting. Unremitting joy, the 4th one. Joy is joy, but it becomes an enlightenment factor when it's unremitting.
Okay.
Also, joy becomes unremitting at the point of the full fulfillment of the path of Sotapanna. That the final aspect of the path of Sotapanna is this joy that can be brought up any time, unremitting, joyful. Why? Joyful in the Dhamma. We always remember the Dhamma. And so that means that we're capable then of beginning to manage feelings directly, because we can be joyful any time. So we can then we can say, I'll choose joy over lust. I'll choose joy over ill will. I don't have to get angry. Because I don't like something doesn't mean that I've got to get angry.
Okay.
Get angry means that I'm trying to change things. If I don't like it, here's an example, Kitty, my daughter. Sometimes she cries, sometimes she throws a tantrum. She hadn't thrown one in a while, but when she did, and when she does throw a tantrum, instead of behaving like most parents, most parents don't like it when a kid throws a tantrum. They get exasperated, they want the kid to shut up. Sometimes they'll give the kid what he wants, which is not a good idea.
Right.
But what I do with Kitty instead is tease her. I show her that she cannot make me go into a tantrum, by her going into a tantrum. And I've seen this several times. I'll do it something like, Kitty is angry. I see you. Moho, moho. That's the Thai word for angry. Moho, moho, And she'll get really angry. And she'll leave the room and slam the door. And 3 to 5 minutes later, she's over. Sometimes it doesn't even 3 minutes. Sometimes we can get her to laugh right there. So that's the way that we begin to, and you know that anger, like many emotions and feelings, are transmitted sympathetically. What I mean by that, if I'm angry, my intention will be to get you angry. And I'll tell you all about it. I either want you to be angry at what I'm angry at, or I want you to be angry at me because I'm angry at you. The same thing is true with sadness or grief. That when people are grieving, they demonstrate it and they show it, and other people around them begin to grieve sympathetically with them. If somebody's very afraid, and the people around them are not mindful, they're not watching what's going on and recognizing that there's no fear, they will become afraid too.
Right.
And in fact, this part of it is what horror movies are built on.
Yeah.
Is sympathetic fear.
Yeah, that makes sense.
All right, well, guess what? Joy is also sympathetic. In fact, sympathetic joy is called mudita in Pali language, and it's one of the Brahma Viharas.
Right,
if you've got joy, spread your joy. Sympathetically vibrate already. So that's what I was doing with Kitty. Kitty gets angry. I don't get angry back at her. She throws a tantrum, and I tease her. Which means that my sympathetic joy actually won out over her sympathetic anger. If you recognize that, that can be a major tool in your life.
Yeah, I can see that.
That whoever's angry at you, your job is to get them unangry. And their job is to get you to be angry.
Right.
In fact, that's how the police normally stop people. They stop people. They're told to be polite, to be this, that, and the other thing, but actually what they're looking for is to make the person afraid, uptight, angry, so that they'll misbehave themselves in front of the cop, and then the cop can make a bust.
Huh. Okay.
And they do that instinctually. They don't even know that they're doing it. It's not actually a plan, but you can see it happen over and over again. But now what the police are having to deal with is they're having to deal with people who've seen a lot of YouTube stuff about you don't have to talk to the police. You can confront the police. In fact, what is appearing, I haven't tried this because I live in Thailand. I don't have to worry about the police. I've got the police in Thailand sussed out. The police in America, a different story.
Yeah.
But basically what we have is people who are recognizing that the police do not have a right constitutionally to be out on the street making stings. In other words, they can't legally stop you for anything at all, and they ask you a question like, do you know how fast you were going? As if you were doing something wrong. And the answer is, officer, I was going exactly the right speed, and I was enjoying it a lot. In other words, you find a way that you don't have to deal with the police.
Oh, they're going to give you a ticket anyway, though.
Yeah, but so what? I'm not going to sign it. I'm not going to accept your ticket. I'm not going to cooperate with you. In fact, I would really, really like it for you to kidnap me and take me and put me into your private little prison that the county operates, because then I can sue you. I can sue you for kidnapping. I don't call it false arrest. I call it kidnapping. You manhandled me. I call it assault. I was assaulted by this man in this blue suit. I was kidnapped by this man in this blue suit. And if you get a sympathetic jury and a good lawyer, we would transform American jurisprudence. Because that cop was only out there in order to make money. He was there on a sting operation.
Right.
Because I have the Fifth Amendment rights, I do not have to show him a driver's license. I do not have to cooperate with the police at all. But I'd better do it wisely, or I'm going to cause a lot of suffering. But I do not have to show him a driver's license. I do not have to admit that I'm driving or that I'm breaking any laws. I can be very polite to the officer. I'm reluctant to call him an officer.
Yeah.
Mr. Hello, I see you're in a blue uniform. But I don't have to cooperate with you. I've got Fifth Amendment. I don't have to show you a driver's license. Can I go now? Or let us say it this way. If I go now, will you harm me? Will you try to kill me if I just leave? And see what he says. Because I'm going, bye-bye. I do not have to do anything you tell me to do. If you harm me, you're going to be in a lot of trouble. You also be careful to have some cameras to watch all of this.
Yeah.
And now that Facebook is the way that it is, you can actually just upload. You can probably upload with Skype or anything like that. So a cell phone is all you need. Make sure that you're recording this. So when you say, officer, I'm leaving now, but I would like to ask you, are you going to harm me or kill me in any way because I'm leaving? Because I haven't done anything and I'm not going to cooperate with you. Now, the first time that happens to a cop in a particular district, there may be a lot of repercussions. But those repercussions are going to transform that police organization. When they start losing one cop after another because they've been taken to court and sued for kidnapping. And when the judge says something like, well, don't you recognize that this is the police? He's got no authority. I'm an American. I've got the Fifth Amendment rights. He busted, whatever he did to me, he did illegally. Here's the second thing, and that is that before the court date, you want to find out what the court is. Let us say that it's just traffic. So you go to traffic court, you stand out in the hallway because there's going to be a lot of friends and relatives and all of that kind of stuff of the people who are dealing with the police. In fact, in several of the courts that I've been in, traffic court, there's a lot of people, and one case after another, bang, 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 bang. So as these court cases come in, what you want to do is say, hey, I want to know anybody or everybody who has been stopped by this one cop. And you know that they're here today because that cop is in court today. So you go to the court date, you find out the name of the cop, you know the name of the cop, you find out when he's in court before your court date. And then you go and you find out 5 or 10 people, or even just 2 or 3, who have also been stopped by this one cop, and you use those as witnesses in your case. That he harassed me, harangued me, he was a bad cop, he stopped me for no reason, I had to pay a fine, and I did nothing wrong. This cop lied about me in court.
Okay.
Okay. And so you got 4 or 5 witnesses. And then you arrange to have a jury trial. And then naturally, your lawyer, to pick your jury, you're going to say, have you ever been stopped by the police? And you always make sure that you've gotten people who have been stopped by the police as your jury. You've got 4 or 5 witnesses saying this is a bad cop, and you've got a pretty good case against that cop. Not only a pretty good case, but not to just to win yours, but a pretty good case to put this guy out of business.
Mm.
And if that happened over and over and over and over again, when the people start fighting up for themselves, and it looks like that might be the time for it, because exactly the same thing is happening with women and sexuality.
Yeah.
That things are changing, that people are wising up, that the reality of the situation is beginning to dawn on people, that those who make the rules do not rule.
Right.
Unless they're given permission to rule.
Right, which is the case, unfortunately.
Unfortunately, that's how it is in America. That's one of the main reasons why I live in Thailand. It's because here in Thailand I have very few rules and regulations that I have to pay any attention to at all. In fact, not speaking the language well enough to know the details of what's going on is quite a benefit.
Yeah, I can see how that would work.
Out of sight, out of mind.
Right.
Don't have to worry about it. So, now we're looking at this idea, this Sila Bhatta Paramasa. That's why the Buddha calls it a fetter, attachment to rites, rules, and rituals. Attachments to doing what the rule makers tell you to do.
Okay.
You don't have to abide by the rules. What you have to do is abide by the rule of suffering and no suffering. And if you would find it a lot of suffering to deal with the cops the way that I'm talking about, don't do it. Not worth the effort.
I've got a couple of dogs misbehaving.
So, this is the way of looking at the way to recognize that anapanasati is a training of the mind so that we can have a mind fit for dealing with the world as the world really exists, not the way that we thought that it existed. That no one can harm you. Nothing can make you suffer. None of your pain comes from the outside world. The police have no power over you at all. No one has any power over you except your own mind. And all suffering comes from the creations of our own mind.
It's a matter of cultivating those skills, though.
Yes, it's a matter of learning the right skill set.
And that's it's doable, but it's no small task.
But it's not necessarily how to say it. The making it a big task is because you want it to be done quickly rather than enjoying each note you play.
Okay.
Instead of looking like a long piece of music that needs to be played, just enjoy each note, note by note. Never mind, start again, come back to the breath, and start again, come back to the breath and start again. Don't have a goal about being free from the police. Just be free from the police right now.
Right.
So when you say it's a big task, you're thinking future.
Yeah, you're right. Okay.
It really is not. There's no future to it.
Well, it's sort of like it's the flip side of what we said earlier about that all conflict is in the past.
Yes.
So.
Exactly so. Well, I've really enjoyed this, Kat. I think that we can bring it to a close now. We've
Okay.
covered some pretty important things about, talked about 7 factors of enlightenment and anapanasati, but mostly the issue is about how we create our own stress.
Okay.
That all your stress is self-created. The government can't create stress for you. Only you can do that. God cannot create stress for you. They can try.
Right.
They can try, and in many cases, they're very successful at creating stress.
So I've heard it from a number of different sources. I think all of them have been monastics, not that that necessarily is important. But there's this idea that I keep running across about the Four Noble Truths are to be practiced. They're not just an intellectual exercise, they're to be practiced. And the first step of the First Noble Truth is to understand our suffering.
Mm-hmm.
Is that what we're talking about here?
Exactly so. In fact, I'm much more dwelling on the second Noble Truth.
Mm-hmm.
But that's exactly what we're talking about. We're talking about what is suffering, taking responsibility for the fact that all of my pain and suffering is self-inflicted. All of it.
Okay.
And that takes us out of being a victim, because victims are the one who believes that our suffering comes from the outside and we're just merely victims of it.
Ah, yes.
But I'm no longer a victim. I do not play victim's role. Now, a victim needs 2 other players. In order to play the victim's game, it needs a perpetrator or a predator, and it needs a helper or a savior.
I see. Interesting.
Johnny hit me, Mommy, Johnny hit me. Those are the 2, Johnny and Mommy, right?
Right.
I'm playing victim. Johnny hit me, and I'm complaining to Mommy. I want her to save me from Johnny, okay? Those
Right.
3 players are in every situation.
Okay.
Almost as if you've got a devil and an angel on both shoulders.
Right.
One does it, and the other one we want to stop. Don't make me do it. Make me do it. Don't make me do it. Make me do it. Okay. So, in that regard, we are no longer victims. We're also no longer perpetrators, because our suffering, no suffering, is reciprocal. You don't harm other people. If that cop stops you, you do not have to cooperate with him, but do not harm him. Do not insult him. Do not do things that are going to cause him to be unhappy with you. Or, in fact, you may wind up having to sue him for kidnapping you.
Right. I know.
Because as far as I know, insulting a cop, while it may get you busted up, it's still not illegal.
Yeah. Right.
But it still causes him suffering, so better not to do it.
Yes.
We're not here to reform the police. We're merely here to be happy. Because it's not our job to reform them.
Right.
But I used all of that as an example to let you see that they do not have the power over you that they claim to have. Just like God has no power over you, like all of the religions claim that God has. He's got no power over you at all. Only you have the ability to make you to punish yourself, to make you suffer, and you're very good at it.
Well, speaking of suffering, this guy is antsy because he needs to go outside.
I know. He used to be paying attention to you. I watched his head. His head used to be with his nose on your chin. Now I see where his head is. He wants out of there. I can tell.
Well, he's trying to get my. He's trying to say, if you don't let me out soon, I'm going to pee on you.
All right. Well, let's not have that. That's suffering in a different way.
Okay.
All right. Okay. Well, we'll see you there.
All right. Talk to you soon.
Okay. Bye-bye.